Belladonna Nishni, Oni Bashashen, Dashashek, Ani Dashanali. My name is Carrie Billy, and I am President and CEO of the American Indian Higher Education Consortium, which is this nation's 37 tribal colleges and universities. So joining me today in this presentation is Dr. Jorgita Antone, who is the director of AHEC's Native Language Research Project, which is generously funded by the Wells Fargo Foundation. Jorgita is going to talk more specifically about the status of the Native Language Research Project and some key findings, and hopefully get some input from you all. And to set up her remarks, I'm going to give you a little background today on tribal colleges. But first, I want to start by thanking ANA, the Department of Health and Human Services, and Department of Interior, and Department of Education, and especially Ron Lessard, the acting director of the White House Initiative on American Indian and Alaska Native Education, for inviting us to participate and for sponsoring the 7th annual National Native Language Summit. That's really exciting, and it's off to a great start. I also want to take a moment just to honor First People of this land. And I know that we are coming to this presentation from all over the United States and perhaps even further away, but I want to acknowledge, particularly I'm in the Washington, DC area, and I want to acknowledge that I and people who are in this area are gathered on the homelands of the Piscataway and Anacostan nations. And I hope you all will just take a second to honor the first people of your land, and that may even be your own tribes, which is really wonderful. I hope that everything we do in our session today and throughout this whole 3 days of summit honors their sacrifices, their prayers, and the care with which they lived and continue to live on this land. I think it's really important to, particularly as we talk about this being Native American Heritage Month, to think about what this land was like to our ancestors before other people came to this land. And also just to acknowledge that, at least to me and probably to many of you, every month is Native American month. And every day is Indigenous Peoples Day to us. This is our land and our homeland. And as Native people, we all, as I said, have creation stories that explain our emergence on this earth, the land, water, sea, or sky. And although our stories vary from tribe to tribe, we are people of this land and this place. And whoops, let me see if I can go back one. So as we think about this place, it's important to acknowledge that before Columbus came to this land, there were about 10 million people living on this land, speaking 1,500 different languages that are found nowhere else on Earth. But that all changed. We know how that changed. I'm not going to go into all that history, but it is important to acknowledge that to our ancestors, education, and particularly higher education, meant equality, an opportunity for equality, and a way to teach our children and our children's children from our own worldview, from our native worldview, and from a way that celebrated our culture, our language, our lands. But of course, that's not what it meant to the federal government at that time and to many others. It was a way to crush our spirits, and as Commissioner Hovland mentioned earlier, to ban our languages and to turn us into people who we are not. And to a great extent, it worked. Our languages were banned. Many people grew up not learning to speak their languages. But in the mid-1960s, things began to change. And for higher education in particular, it started with a group of Navajo leaders who asked their people, our people, how do you want our schools to look? That was the day, according to Guy Gorman, that something happened. Things began to change. They had ceremonies, they had prayer, and that was the beginning of the tribal college movement, a way to teach higher education from our own worldview, from our own culture, our languages, and our tradition. And we flourished since then from that first tribal college. 5 or 6 more tribal colleges quickly followed thereafter, all founded in the ceremony, prayer, dedicated to their community, place-based institutions, teaching from their different worldviews. And in 1973, AHEC was formed. And we've now grown to 37 tribal colleges, as I mentioned earlier, 37 tribal colleges in 16 states, operating 75 sites throughout Indian country and serving tribal students from more than 230 federally recognized Indian tribes. So it's really exciting to see the tribal college movement, which is continuing to grow and evolve. We have new tribal colleges forming even now, which is tremendously exciting for us. And we're all working toward that same vision, toward a vision of strong, sovereign tribal nations through excellence in tribal higher education. One of the reasons tribal colleges, many of the colleges were formed, almost all of them were formed to teach from their own worldview, but to also preserve and revitalize their own tribal languages and cultures. So in a variety of ways, tribal colleges are working to preserve and revitalize their tribes' languages. They're doing a lot of things, serving their tribes as place-based institution, providing academic services from certificate programs to master's degree programs, but also doing a lot of community-based education, native language restoration, including having native language requirements for their as a requirement for graduation. They're doing a lot of community-based programs, and Yurgita is going to talk more specifically about the language programs taught at tribal colleges, but I think it's important to remember that not only are academic language programs taught at tribal colleges, but a tremendous amount of community-based programs. In fact, tribal colleges serve about 160,000 American Indians, Alaska Natives, and other rural community residents and community-based programs every year. Our colleges are teaching education programs, K-12 education programs in native language instruction with some really exciting apprenticeship programs, and doing everything they can to build those strong sovereign tribal nations, knowing that culture and language is a core element of our continued existence as Native people. The really unique thing about tribal colleges that sets them apart from other institutions of higher education is that they teach their curriculum from a core of tribal culture and values. Spirituality and ceremony is tremendously important, and as I mentioned, place, community, family, tribal scholarship, building a tribal research base, working toward sovereignty, and a key part of that is culture and language. We call it the cornstalk as a Navajo, the cornstalk in the center of their curriculum. So the curriculum at tribal colleges, culture is the core of that curriculum, and then the curriculum is built around culture and language. I like the way one student said it to me once. We start every week with a pipe and end every week with a drum. But that's the kind of thing that you won't find, I think, at any other institutions of higher education. And it's that concern for curriculum and for culturally based, language-based instruction that led AHEC and all the tribal colleges to apply for funding for this research initiative. You know, we realize that tribal colleges are teaching native language programs, but they're all teaching in different ways. And especially with the way that native languages are disappearing, that people aren't learning and retaining, especially our young people, we need to find ways to teach our languages and to use them in, I don't want to say more efficient, but more quickly, because we are in a crisis, an urgent crisis situation. So we started this research initiative, this collaborative language project, to try to figure out what are the best ways to teach and learn our languages. And how can we share that information among all the tribal colleges, with other institutions of higher education, and most importantly, with our K-12 schools, so we can all work together to sustain our sovereign tribal nations. So I'm gonna, with that, turn it over to Yurgita, who's going to tell you what we've been doing with this language project and what our hopes for the future are.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, thank you.
Aning yat henshe mitakuya pichunte washtena pichiuza piksto. I shake your hands with a good heart. I am Yurgita Antoine, AHEC's Native Language Research Director. And I have the honor of speaking with you today from the lands of the Sissetonwa Wahpetunwa Oyate, in English known as the Sisseton Wahpeton Sioux tribe in South Dakota. I head AHEC's Native Languages Initiative, Reclaiming the Words of Our Ancestors, which is the first time we're attempting to bring together all TCU language faculty and staff to develop a common strategy and action plan to teach and preserve our native languages. This is the first time it is being done. So just to mention that, speaking of native languages, being taught at the tribal colleges, this is the most sensitive area where most trauma still resides. And we're talking not just about the loss of languages. This is the loss of a lifestyle, social structure, limited access to cultural knowledge, because in some cases, practices have been lost. And also, we're talking about the deterioration of family relationships that are hard to restore. And all that comes with languages going away. Also, all native languages, with the exception of the Navajo, and I'm tempted also to say that some languages of our northern relatives are in a better position up in Alaska. But all native languages today are severely endangered in the US. And but some languages are being restored in the youth generation. And I mean specifically Ojibwe, Blackfeet, and these languages are being restored through the immersion schools. This project was planned out in two phases. The first phase was the discovery phase, and the second one was strategic planning. And I have to tell you that with my 20 plus years working with Native American communities, you can go to the next slide. There's a lot that I learned, because when I first started working on this project, I thought that I knew pretty much everything what is happening with Native languages in Indian country. By now, I can tell you that this is not the case. So that revised a lot of things that a lot of the knowledge that I had, and a lot of beliefs that I held. And I'll just tell you that there is so much hope and there's so much hard work happening right now at the TCUs. And I will tell you some more throughout those next slides. So the first phase was reading, pretty much review of the published sources. What can we read about? We read about models and methods in language instruction, preservation, and that is, of course, immersion, language nests, apprenticeships. Sometimes we have, well, in many cases by now, we have these two merging. Also, there are grammar translation-based teaching methods. There are other methods. Right now, a language instruction is mostly moving to interactive methods, which allow students to show what they have learned, to communicate, to start communicating in their native languages themselves. And I have to quote one of the language instructors from Sinteglishka University, who very nicely said about this, that we are in the post-method era right now. He said, you know, all the methods have been discovered. The only things that we need to figure out right now is what works best in our specific communities and in our specific situations. We're also reading about design of K through 12 and college programs, and the models that stand out there is the use of second language learner instructors for basic courses is being recognized, and then first language fluent speakers to teach advanced courses, to teach culture courses, and so in some cases use the language as the medium of instruction. Um, uh, of course, we read about integrating language and culture because these two simply cannot be separated. As a matter of fact, in some of the communities that are losing language use domains, um, ceremonies and cultural activities are still the domains where language use is holding. And of course, we read about language documentation and archiving, which changes so fast because, as you know, the formats, technology are changing so fast almost every day. We hear about something new, and that is a pretty a difficult area to keep up with. And we can only do our best to adapt and to adjust with things that are happening, and the new things and new tools and new technologies that we see. So after this, we were planning to start the virtual, we were planning to start physical campus site visits this spring, as soon as the snow melts in March, when it's finally safe to get on the roads, and you all know what happened then. The COVID arrived. So after about a month of uncertainty and fear, we started virtual campus site visits on Zoom, just like I'm speaking with you right now. We started reaching out to all TCU language programs and administrators and informing them what is happening with the language initiative and asking them for meetings. So it started in April 2020, and by now I have to say congratulations to our TCUs, because as you see, we managed to reach almost everybody. Out of 37 TCUs, 34 site visits have been completed by November 15th. And this is where the basis for our planning and for our knowledge will be coming from. So there is a lot to report. You'll probably be happy to hear that 29 languages representing 11 language families are being taught at the TCUs right now. And 21 TCUs have well-developed programs with multiple levels of language courses and courses in linguistics, applied linguistics, methods, and so on. I found out about one program which is getting ready to launch a PhD in their language and culture next year, as of next fall, and that is Navajo Technical University. The language is Dine. And I also spoke with another program who have a bachelor's degree right now, but they are working to develop master's degree in their language and culture. So things are happening. We have multiple 4-year degrees offered in language and culture, 2-year degrees, and also language certificates that certify people who want to teach the language, let's say in the schools. We can go to the next slide now. And this brings us to strategic planning. So the visits, the individual visits, focus on finding out the needs and the resources that are currently available and used by TCU language faculty and students. And that varies very widely by region, by community. So, you know, we go from, let's say, people publishing books in their language and having their own press set up to publish books and other resources in their language, like in Navajo country. And then, you know, we also have programs and communities that are struggling to get the language out there to get visibility. So after the individual visits are completed, we have regional meetings. A total of 4 regional meetings are being planned. 2 have already happened. We have 2 more to go, after which we're gonna go to draft the action plan. And who knows what will happen with COVID and with our current situation, but you know, we have to keep that adaptability in mind. But we were planning to have all stakeholder meeting to review the draft action plan, which would include the TCUs and also partner organizations, which might involve, let's say, other community language programs, immersion programs, tribal programs, some academic partners. But by now, we're looking at so many people getting involved and the group constantly expanding that we might have to continue working in small groups to be productive. We'll see how this goes. And then finally, when we have the action plan prepared, which I'm hoping will happen by March of next year, we're planning the wide dissemination of the action plan and everybody agreeing on the strategy. So next, major findings to date. You know, looking at needs, one of the major needs that stands out is that our language programs need consistent funding, sustainable, adequate, and consistent. Right now, most of the language programs survive on various grant funding. And what happens with grants, they all run out. You know, so for example, this year, right before the school started, I heard about one of the immersion schools in on the Crow Reservation was forced to shut down because the grant ran out. Other funding couldn't be found. So the parents were told to find other schools for their children. And that was the part that really broke my heart there. Being a parent who also has kids in school, how do you go? What do you do? Where do you go when your school shuts down like that? Another thing that we discussed in the regional meetings and individual meetings is the need for native language centers. And we're looking at this at a different types of different scales. So we're looking at a center who would be coordinating other initiatives and other activities and the activities that are happening at the TCUs. We're looking at the native language centers at the community level, or at the language level. For example, there are 10 tribal colleges that teach Ojibwe language. And we talked about the need for a center that could host various activities like art, language archives, media production, development of curriculum materials that could be shared across universities and other things. Um, there's definitely a need for a development of more multimedia language materials, and that also leads us to more exposure to language and more opportunities for language use in the communities. And we are creating a community of practice, and there was a need that people unanimously vote that they want AHEC Language Society with yearly conferences, meetings where people would be able to come together and share their ideas, share their best practices, share their stories, because we don't know a lot of things about what is happening. And also being working at TCUs, sometimes, it gets lonely. It gets lonely if you don't know what others are doing. You need that support. You need that talking to your peers. You need to talk to other instructors. You need to share what you do. You need to hear about things that are being done elsewhere. And, that's our best driving force, leading by example. The things that we talk about with language programs is that, and some of the things that I also learned throughout the course of this project, is that we cannot be anymore evaluating. We cannot be prescriptive. We need to show what we have. And among Native Americans, what really works is leading by example. So if we show a very successful program, others will follow. And we need continuous improvement, of course, and we need to share resources also, and to figure out how to do those things. And an important thing that we try to do with individual site visits is to get the teaching faculty involved in the planning process. And, that is a major thing, because too often educational program evaluations focus on evaluating the work of teachers while excluding the teacher's voice and while excluding the teacher's perspective. So I am very proud again that language instructors have been very active and contribute their ideas and their needs to our planning process. We probably need to go to the next slide. And adaptability is a major thing that we always need to keep that in mind working with Native American languages and communities. You don't know, you plan to start in one place, but you know you might end up in something completely different. So that happened with COVID too, and you know, COVID or not, adaptability is our major need and major strength. With online instruction and programs moving to online space, the instructors I've talked to, I have to admit that I've heard only positive things. And to the point where everybody says that the language classes have been full. And also the another really good thing is that people, TCUs, are getting requests from outside of their service areas. Let's say if there are tribal members in different states, in cities, or sometimes even in a different country, they get requests about how to join those classes. They want to learn. They want to join classes on Zoom, online, and you know, they're looking into opening up those opportunities and to get more people involved. And with community, and this project is a lot about building relationships, building community, and like I said, that we are moving from evaluating and being prescriptive to just finding out about what is happening at the local level and supporting those local efforts, because the teaching faculty, who are the key in the planning process, oftentimes they have all the answers. We just need to ask them what they know and what they can share and work with them. Oha, I'm done. So thank you for this time to share these thoughts. Back to you.
Well, thank you. That was fantastic. What an incredible presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Yurgita. I just wanted to add, just to build on some of the things that Yurgita was talking about, um, the adaptability due to COVID and how more students are enrolling, particularly in native language classes. We've had some tribal colleges, some have had declines in enrollment, so we're really concerned about that. But some tribal colleges have seen significant enrollment increases because all of the tribal colleges moved to online education last spring, and all but one this semester are predominantly online only. Although there are a few, not only, there are a few career and technical courses that they're doing in person, but predominantly online. And so they found one college, Tohono O'odham Community College, has gone from serving one tribe, the O'odham Nation, to now having students from over 50 different tribes at their college.
Wow. Wow.
So really expanding. And, you know, Sinta Gleska University doubled their enrollment this semester. So we know that there is a hunger for native language courses throughout the country, and as Yurgita mentioned, throughout the world. So we're hoping to, you know, if anything positive comes out of this pandemic, this experience, and, you know, which has been so devastating to our communities and our people, if anything comes out of it, it's that through improving our technology infrastructure and improving our ability to teach online, that we are going to be able to reach more Native people around wherever they live. And since, you know, almost 70% live off reservation near urban areas, we feel that this is a great way to serve them. So we're trying to figure out how we can really build this national tribal university system to serve Native people wherever they are.
And Carrie, that speaks to the need for funding to do that. You know,
Right,
whether it's federal funding or philanthropic organizations.
right. One of the big things was uh, uh, for us, for all of you, our communities going into this pandemic were so far behind the rest
Right.
of the country in terms of IT, technology, cyber infrastructure. So having to build, having so much to catch up just to even start is a tremendous undertaking for Indian country. But then to make sure we do it in a way that's sustainable, that we can build on it and really serve our people is a huge challenge.
Yeah.
So something we're working on. But there are hopeful signs, and one I just want to quickly mention, well, two, quickly mention, we have an annual student conference, AHEC, so for all tribal college students. And we have two events in particular, a poetry slam and
Yes.
which is really exciting. There's so many talented students at tribal colleges. So we have a poetry slam and we have a film competition. And when we first started these about 4 or 5 years ago, they were all in English. And now
Wow.
this last one that we had, about half were in their tribal language, their native language.
Oh, that's great.
So yeah,
So great.
really great to see all these young people speaking their language, being creative with it, and sustaining it for future generations.
And so often, when I speak to young people, and young people and elders and in between, that that the first language meter has moved. So first language at one time was your native language. Now for people, your first language is English, and they're going back and learning their language, knowing how important that is for them and their culture. And it's a gap that a lot of young people are starting to close, to make something happen about that. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we were wondering, Yogita presented the major findings so far, and we were wondering, since we have a little time, if anyone has questions, but if not, did those findings resonate with you, and what are we missing? What are your needs? I can put them back up, I think, if I can get the right, yeah. Okay, that should be, so far, these are our major findings. But just wondering with the group. So I think you can just unmute yourself. And if you dialed in, you can do *6 and then unmute, or just, unmute your phone on Zoom.
Yate, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yate, Carrie, this is James McKenzie. I'm curious. Thank you very much for your presentation, to both you and Yogita Iba Jensen. I am curious. It's really interesting, and I appreciate the work that you're doing here. I think it's so important and needed. I'm curious to know a little bit more. It seemed like a lot of what is being focused on now is around the pedagogical aspects, the teaching and learning of language, the cultivation of language, which I think this is absolutely needed, and it's wonderful. We always, there's too much to do and not enough of us to do it. But I'm curious if the project also incorporates anything, if it addresses some of like the more societal and system-wide aspects of the role of tribal colleges in language revitalization. Excuse me, like what I mean by that is, in a sense, some people will categorize it or characterize it as the role of tribal colleges in nation building, particularly the role of cultivating the resources, acting as catalysts and contributors to anything from increasing the use of our languages in schools, but also to the broader like revernacularization of our languages really in all walks of life, right? and have been, so I'm no longer at the Net College. I'm back in graduate school right now, but having been at the Net College for a number of years, I think at least at that institution, there's such a unique role and a position that that particular institution plays for Navajo Nation. And I'm sure that there must be similar situations for many of the other TCUs. Sorry, this is long, but I'm just curious if there's anything looking at those aspects, because I think it's also very important. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a critical point, and I think I'll let Yurgita really respond to that, but I think that's what she was getting about the native language centers and the more exposure for language and opportunities for use, because that, you're right. I mean, tribal colleges alone or a school alone can't do this. We're not going to sustain our languages if we don't build that language use throughout the community. So, Yurgita?
Yes, this is a good question because there is a lot to be elaborated on. First of all, I can say that our tribal colleges and universities are the intellectual centers of the communities. And for some languages, these TCUs are the only places in the world where where that particular language is being taught in academic settings. So for example, I haven't heard about Grovant being taught anyplace else except at a TCU. With Lakota, I believe it's the same by now as well. Other languages are in similar positions. So, when we talk about those needs, and you just get the tip of the iceberg here on the slide, but we take a document, we review it, we discuss it, and then we vote which ones are getting recognized as the most important needs. So basically we prioritize them. So every region is slightly different. For example, the last one that we had, and that region was a lot of fluent speakers participated in that meeting. And basically what we came up with is 2 massive research projects that could be hosted at TCUs. And one is looking at curriculum development from the point of filtering the subject areas, various subject areas like math, like physics, like sciences out of the language. That's a massive research project in itself right there. And another one was, again, speaking of integrating language and culture, was a point was brought up about place names and the fact that when places get renamed in the English language, the references that people had to that place or the happenings, something that occurred at that place, they're being lost. That's another research project in itself. Some colleges, not many, they already have small centers where a lot of media work is being done. Other colleges are trying to apply right now for grants to set up similar language centers at their TCUs in their communities. And again, speaking of language centers, they can involve a lot of activities, starting from hosting the language materials, archival materials, to media production, research projects to simply having a place where speakers could or learners could come and simply have a space for them to use the language. So I hope that that answers your question to a point, because there's a lot here. Like I said, it's just the tip of the iceberg, and we're looking at all these things.
And I also think, James, or anyone else, if you have ideas or things that you see that tribal colleges should be doing that we're not doing, or maybe one's doing well, or there are other examples. I mean, we've taken a lot of examples from the Native Hawaiians and other people. Let us know, because I think, as Yogita said, leading by example is one way we get tribal colleges and others to do things. So if we can start something small with one community or one college, and then others see that that's successful, then they'll emulate it. So, if there's more, particularly on that community-wide scale, that we should be doing, let us know.
My name's Joe, and I'm in Wyoming. I'm at the Wind River Reservation, and I'm a federal programs director. And so I am pleased, number one, to hear that a lot of Native students are taking advantage of college during this pandemic time. That's awesome. Two is that, looking at your findings, there's affirmation to the efforts that we're doing from our mission and vision statements and we're working on doing an immersion program, but we're wanting to do it from the ground up. We actually have our elders in the schools. We're training our folks who work transportation, food, every aspect of education, from administration to just simple greetings. And so it was really good to see this. And we're actually working on our culture language center, because we know it's important. But I'd like to, if you guys could share this information, I put my email via chat, and maybe we can outsource, because I think you said it best, is that we just need to grow, and we can't just do it on our own and reaching out. And I think ideally we'd be a good fit for any of your projects, because we're centrally located, and one of the, I'm one of the greatest reservations. I'll pat ourselves on the back, but thank you for all the hard work you're doing. Just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Whoops, sorry. Yeah, great. Thank you. We'll make sure we get that down. And I think other people are putting in some of the things they're doing. But yeah, we definitely love to connect with you, because we're looking for the best models out there and to build this community.
And we also have an all stakeholder get together coming up. So I will be reaching out. Thank you for your input and for your contact information. You'll be hearing from me.
Okay.
Hey, Carrie, I had a
Yeah.
question. This is Ron. And I think maybe this can happen on a national level, but one of the things that happens for me, not only personally, but in my work, is to raising the level of the need for revitalization and preservation of native languages, that it's almost an epidemic, that many of our languages not only are extinct, but there are several languages that are that there are very few language speakers and very few writers left. And so how do we raise that on a national level, the importance of that? It's not, we know that certainly in Indian country, we know how important it is, but we need to do more to get that on the national level, that needs to be on the front burner of something that that we all need to work on, I think. So.
Yeah, you're right. It does have to, this is a crisis. So it has to be
Yeah.
treated like that at the national and federal level. And it's great what the programs that exist, but sort of tied to one of the questions that's in the chat about funding, what is adequate funding? Well,
Right.
adequate funding is enough money for our programs to sustain themselves into the future, to future generations. So that we have the not just the programs, but the linguists, the
Right.
people we need. So it's a much bigger effort. We can estimate just at the tribal college level, but the need is much greater than that. So
Right.
hopefully things like this, the National Summit will be a catalyst, and definitely working with the new administration
Yes.
to get this as a key priority for the administration. Critically important.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And, tying things into the United Nations UNDRIP, and
Right.
that's something that's really important, because it's recognized, and we have the world behind us, that indigenous languages are how important it is to preserve the languages and to revitalize languages that exist. And so I think maybe this coming year we can do a lot more with the UN. I represented the Department of Ed on the Indigenous Language Working Group a few years ago, and that needs to be revitalized as well.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, well, we do have new opportunities. So someone else in the, or we hope we'll have new opportunities, and someone else in the chat asked about partnerships, if any, with land grant universities. And I think that's another good point. Tribal colleges are what's called the 1994 land grants. I always think that's kind of ironic. The state land grants are 1862s, because every state was designated, an institution within their state was designated a land grant in 1862. And then historically Black colleges were designated land grants in 1890. And then in 1994, more than 100 years later, the first people of this land, their institutions were designated as land grant institutions. It's particularly ironic because a lot of the state land grants, the way they became their land grant was in many cases tribal land. So, but we are part of the land grant family, and we work with the particularly our regional land grant institutions. We have a small research program, really tiny research program for our land grants, but I think that's another area where we could strengthen our partnerships, both in extension, reaching out to the communities, but also definitely in research. So we need to look into that more. I don't know if tribal colleges are doing any, I know they partner with their regional institutions, but I don't know any specific land grant initiatives. Do you, Yorgita?
There are some in some places. I know that in the Southwest, there are probably more partnerships. In Montana, I heard some too, but that just goes case by case. And with some of them, those partnerships work, with some of them they don't. So it's some said that they only want to do place-based work and place-based learning and research, and this is what they want to do. Others, they're more open to sharing things and partnering with others. I also see a question about funding. Did we address that yet? What we need, what we mean when we talk about sustainable and adequate funding?
I just kind of mentioned it, but you might have more from your conversations with the tribal colleges?
Details. Basically, what I'm hearing is that a lot of TCUs have language instructors as adjuncts. And they might be teaching as many as 5 courses a semester as adjuncts, and that is funding related. And, this is too much, but basically that they just do not have the money to hire full-time instructors. So that was one thing. Another thing, like I said, a lot of those programs, they're grant funded. So basically what happens is that if you get a large chunk of funding for 2 for 3 years, it runs out. And what do you do
Right.
then? So the program, sometimes you might end up losing the program. And that really damages the community. Because to start it up back again after, let's say, that school that I mentioned that was shut down, to start something back up again will be very, very hard because the community would be frustrated and disappointed. So, sometimes what I was thinking about when visiting with the language programs is that if there were even smaller amounts of money available, but if that was consistent, let's say if instead of, 200,000, we had 30,000 or 50,000, but we know that this will be coming every year, it would be easier to build something long-term
Yes.
rather than having a lot of communities, a lot of educational institutions competing against each other. Being in this time of crisis for native languages, I would say that, we do not have time for this anymore.
And this is Jim, and can you hear me? What I was asking about when I was talking about cost is we have a lot of small tribes that have very small populations that are not near a tribal college or have their own tribal colleges, but they have these small buckets of money where they're trying to invest in maintaining their language. So I was just trying to get a sense of at the local level for those tribes that are trying to develop their program, what kind of costs, and I like your idea of, if there's 30,000 or 40,000, that can be maintained, maybe that's a good base level for people to think about, because it's a continuous process, and once you get your dictionary, once you get all these little things, it's how do you maintain it? How do you then start sharing that information with the community, et cetera? So yeah, we have a programs where we fund for childcare, and with that funding, there's dollars that can be used for quality activities, such as language. So tribes, that's one area where tribes actually have a little leverage in using some of those program dollars to help build and sustain some type of language program. So I think, again, increasing communication, especially with those small tribes, of the flexibilities that are actually out there and how the tribal colleges can help with all the backside of it, the linguistics, how do you maintain or keep this data, how do you prepare a curriculum, all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I was going with that. So thank you.
So Carrie, I have a comment too. This is Ron Lassard. A couple of things came up at one of the other language summits we did a couple of years ago in Albuquerque. Was one regarding funding. If you're looking for funding for native languages and you Google funding for native languages, you might not get what you need. There are a lot of opportunities for funding. You could Google something, like federal government cultural things, or there are a lot of opportunities. And um, you know, one of the gentlemen from New Mexico back then said, we miss out on a lot of funding because we don't, we put it in as what we think or what we want, when it may come under another category. So that's something to look forward to, or look to. The other thing is that, you know, when I was at the United Nations, the, the, the folks from New Zealand mentioned to me that, that they have very successful language programs because of three things. Two things. They work with the three entities which are federal, which create laws and government. They work with the folks on the ground that do the work, the teachers, the language, um, you know, people that work with the students. And then they work with the philanthropic organizations to fund that. And one of the comments that they made was that you, meaning the United States, we think the federal government has to do everything. It has to be funded by the government. They monitor it. They make the decisions. They decide what has to happen. And so often we don't have successful language programs. And I don't mean in TCUs, but I mean in efforts to get funding for programs and then sustain those programs. And so there are a lot of funding opportunities that are, you know, for me, I mean, working in the federal government, that are not federal government, that are philanthropic, but then are also funding opportunities that speak to, you know, the sustaining programs that exist. So if you've been able to get a grant through the federal government for something, there may be a philanthropic organization that will help you sustain that for a number of years. And, you know, I know that that's something that needs to be spoken of more and need to be talked about, because there is funding out there for languages, but it may not often come in that form, you know, and say, you know, so anyway, that's my point. So
I just wanted to say, this is Scott from Conestoga Language and Culture Authority. I appreciate everybody's time this evening, and especially the acknowledgement of my comments from Ms. Carrie Billy. I appreciate your time, and that as a nonprofit and non-federally recognized person, that I've been permitted to participate. So I thank you.
Great, thank you. You know, what occurs to me, particularly after Jim's question, and people like Scott, that what might be helpful, maybe this exists somewhere, but if not, maybe it's something we could all work on, is just to add more things for everyone to do, but kind of like a toolkit for small tribes, because there are so many small tribes and tribes that don't have tribal colleges or don't work with a regional university, or but a toolkit like estimating what the cost would be to stand up a native language program. You know, what are the key things you need, and what are some resources that are available? That could be really useful, because maybe the investment, if you look at it by language groups, wouldn't be that much, as long as it's sustainable. I'm kind of thinking of the way the Tribal College Land Grant Program started. But that could be really useful to try to get something started. And we have some really small tribal colleges, like Yurgita mentioned Grovant, but you know, who kind of went through that experience, that could probably help inform that.
that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, we do have blueprints on what is needed to start a language program. So, you know, we could work with tribes, and once you do that, you gotta attach the numbers and the dollar signs to those. But those documents, they actually exist.
Yeah.
So we could share. And
Yeah.
you know, this is also, that's what we're trying to do, to build this network, and TCU centered network. And then, you know, looking at partnerships, there's so many different possibilities. So I really look forward to working with all of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you all. I think we're over time a little bit. So
Yeah. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you and your colleague for being with us today.
Well, thank you all for joining us, and Yurgita, thank you for doing all the work.
Of course.
And thank you, Ron, Will, and everyone. This is, as I think Commissioner Hovland mentioned, this is our passion and our life's work,
It
particularly
is.
for the tribal colleges. So, and I know it's yours also. So thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Well, everyone take care and thank you for joining us. Be sure and join us if you can. This week, the Native American Language Summit, we have several different sessions that'll be excellent. One of them is we'll be doing an honoring for the Native American Code Talkers. We'll be doing that on Wednesday. So I hope you can join in. There'll be an award that's being presented to ATALM, Association of Tribal Libraries, Museums, and then also through the National Museum of American Indian, and paying tribute to the World War I, World War II code talkers. An award going to Senator Udall, and it's a whole thing about that on the site. So, please join us if you can for that. I think it's very special. The National Museum of American Indian just opened the Veterans Memorial. So I always ask folks to take a look at that and be involved in it because of it's so tied into language and our native languages and how our native languages were used during the time, and how our veterans, really saved so many lives by the use of using native languages. So I encourage everyone to join in on that. So thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.